This is absolutely insane. It's mayhem.
This is not America. This is an insurgency. They are taking over our country.
Whoa. This is Dearborn, Michigan right now.
But we got the best mayor possible.
This is a video for my fellow Christians and Americans. How should we think about Islam in America, and specifically the teachings of Islam? So why am I doing this video? Well, with the recent election of the new mayor of New York City, Mandani, it made me think, man, America is more Islamic than it's ever been. It's just like one of their key major cities has a Muslim mayor. Is Islam bad? Should Christians vote for Muslims? All those things have just been on the forefront of my mind with this election. And so I've been digging into Islam more to try to understand it as a Christian. Now, right off the bat for this video, I will not say I'm an expert on anything Muslim, that's for sure. But I am a Christian. I love the Lord and I love America. And as I've looked into Islam, I have some concerns that I think other Christians and Americans should be aware about. And hopefully this video will help you think through some of these questions that are arising. In this video, we're going to cover 3 Western ideas that are incompatible with Islam and Sharia law. We're going to cover 4 Muslim doctrines that are very concerning for us as Americans and Christians that you need to be aware about. And then we're going to talk about why Islam and the Prophet Muhammad is false and not true, and how Christianity is true instead. And we're going to look at some of that, why Christians should reject Islam, and then applications of what it means for us today. Let's dive in. So recently I saw this video from Charlie Kirk. Charlie Kirk is a Christian American hero that passed away fighting for our country. And I was like, man, I wonder what Charlie Kirk thought about Islam. So I was looking at some of his videos, and 3 reasons he gave of why Islam and American values are not compatible.
Islam compatible with Western values. Macro. Of course it's not. There are 3 major reasons why. Islam does not believe in freedom of speech. Islam does not believe in freedom of religion, and Islam does not believe in separation of mosque and state. Those 3 things are antithetical to the West. In a Muslim majority country, most Muslim majority countries, you cannot criticize the Prophet Muhammad. In most Muslim majority countries, you do not have the same robust freedom of religion protections. And finally, whereas we in the West are very careful to try to intermix religion and state, they are commanded to actually go into the state and try to change the state to be more Islamic around the core pillars of Islam. And the last thing I'll finally say is, I cannot see a single Western country that has become more Islamic and has become a better place to live that is happier or freer.
So it's incompatible because Muslims believe in Sharia law. Sharia comes from the Qur'an, which is their main guiding authoritative book, much for Christians like the Bible. And then after Sharia is the Hadith. The Hadith is the traditions, the teachings of the Prophet Muhammad that are outside of the Quran. And then the Sunnah is the life of Muhammad, biographies about his life. And then some other things factor into play, like how the early Muslim leaders interpreted different things and stuff like that. But those 3 are the top 3 sources that influence Sharia, which is the life that a Muslim should live, religious practices, legal law. And as you look at Muslim countries where there's Sharia law in place, where they're in control, some things that go against freedom of speech is Muslims have blasphemy laws. Blasphemy laws that you can't speak about the Prophet Muhammad, or else you can be killed for blaspheming the name of Allah. Also, what goes against the freedom of religion very strongly is Muslim countries have the death penalty for becoming apostate. So if you turn against the religion, you were a Muslim, and then you go against the Muslim religion, you get killed for apostatizing, for unbelief. And so obviously that goes against Western values. And the Prophet Muhammad, he was both a spiritual leader and a political king. And so you don't have the separation of leadership there, but Muhammad, he was the judge, he was the jury, he was the lawmaker, He was the executive branch, the judicial branch, the legislative branch. He did it all. And so there's no separation of church and state. And in the life of Jesus, you see him not taking on that political kingship that the people tried continually put on him, but he would reject and run away from during his leadership here on earth, as he was a religious leader, but not a political leader. Jesus even said, my kingdom is not of this world. Now, Jesus will come back at the end of time and set up a new heaven and a new earth and have kingdom on that. But that is not how Christianity operates here in this world, that we don't pass on our religion and try to make it a political kingdom. And you can see that's how America was set up, a separation in the First Amendment of church and state under Christian values and Christian principles of the freedom of religion. And so this is not just me saying stuff. Throughout this video, I want to give why I'm concerned, because you can't just believe we know Christians all can believe different things, but our authoritative source is the Bible. And so if you want to know what a Christian really should be believing, what a Christian is about, you go to what the Bible says, and you go to what the leader of Christianity said. You look at the life and teachings of Jesus. Now, if you want to know what a Muslim believes, you look at the authoritative sources, the Qur'an, the Hadith, the Sunnah, that lead and guide Muslim life. Now, Muslims will all believe different things. Not every Muslim that lives in America is a radical Islamist. But when you look at the life of Muhammad and you look at the teachings of the Quran and the Hadith, you see that these radical Muslims that, are persecuting Christians and 9/11 happened in New York City, and now we have a Muslim mayor in New York City, man, crazy. And so was the radical Muslims that bombed the World Trade Center, is that a misrepresentation of Islam, or is that actually derived from the teachings of Islam? And I think when you look at the sources, you see that the sad truth is that this is what Islam is in its core. And now you can have great Muslims that are westernized here in America, but if they're going to actually believe what their book says and look and follow the life of Muhammad, it's going to lead you to a life of radical Islam if you really follow it to a T. And so some examples. For the example of blasphemy laws, where is that found in the Sharia law? And where this is the source of a big part of where this is okay and found, the source of why this is legitimate is in Sunnah Abu Dawood 4361, a hadith about the Prophet Muhammad. And so it says, narrated Abdullah ibn Abbas, a blind man had a slave mother who used to abuse the Prophet and disparage him. He forbade her, but she did not stop. He rebuked her, but she did not give up her habit. One night she began to slander the Prophet and abuse him. She took a dagger. So the blind man, took a dagger, placed it on her belly, pressed it in, and killed her. A child who had came between her legs was smeared with the blood that was there. When the morning came, the Prophet was informed about it. And so you have this horrible situation of this blind man has a slave woman, and this woman is not abusing the Prophet physically, but abusing him with words. That he's saying, things that disparage him, make him look bad, make him look like a false prophet. And this blind man, who is her owner, is so upset by what she's doing that he goes and he stabs her in the belly after warning her. And the worst part, obviously her dying is the worst part, but the next worst part is she had a child or a baby, either like a toddler between her legs or a baby in her lap, that her blood was spilled out on the baby as she was murdered. And so it's just a terrible situation. So of course there was an outrage, I would guess, over this, and people went to the Prophet to try to figure out what he would do. And so you would think, at least I would think, that he would condemn that. Like, man, that's terrible. You shouldn't kill someone just because they said something bad about me. And this poor baby that was affected, this poor child that was affected by this incident. And so he assembled the people and said, I adjure you by Allah, the man who has done this action, and I adjure him by the right to him that he should stand up. So he's like, the man who did this, come forth. Jumping over the necks of the people and trembling, the man stood up. He sat before the Prophet and he said, Messenger of Allah, I am her master. She used to abuse you and disparage you. I forbade her, but she did not stop. And I rebuked her, but she did not abandon her habit. I have 2 sons like pearls from her. And so not only was she his slave woman, but he would have sex with her. She was like his concubine. And he had 2 children. This was their mom. This is the baby mama of his 2 kids that he loves. And she was his companion, a friend, But he killed her. Last night she began to abuse and disparage you. So I took a dagger and put it on her belly and pressed it in and killed her. Dearborn. And so what's the prophet going to say? Oh, be witness, no retaliation is payable for her blood. Nothing. This man just killed a woman in cold blood just for saying things, criticisms against the prophet. And so that's why there's blasphemy laws against today with Sharia law against the prophet. And that's why Muslims get so mad and upset if you say something against their prophet, is because you have this example of what their prophet did when he was criticized and disparaged. And so this is found in their holy documents and their authoritative sources. And so this totally tears apart any freedom of speech. If Muslims become in power, you can see what would happen. So apostasy, where's that found in laws against that? We see this in Sahih al-Bukhari 30:17. We hear the story narrated by Ibn Abbas. It says that Ali burnt some people, and this news reached Ibn Abbas, who said, had I been in his place, I would not have burnt them. As the Prophet said, don't punish anyone with Allah's punishment. No doubt I would have killed them. For the Prophet said, if anybody, a Muslim, discards his religion, kill him. And so Ali burnt some people for apostatizing and leaving Islam. And this other guy, Ibn Abbas, said that you shouldn't have burnt them. Muhammad said that burning people is only God's punishment, but we should have killed them. I would have killed them because the Prophet said that if anyone changes his religion, to kill him. And so we see directly from Muhammad again, directly from their authoritative sources, that for someone leaving the Muslim faith, you should kill them. And we have to remember that there's this teaching, and I think this is really important. There's this teaching in the Qur'an that that Muhammad is the perfect example for a Muslim. It's called Uswa Hasana, that he's the perfect example. And this is from the Qur'an, their holy book, Qur'an chapter 33:21. It says, you indeed and the messenger of Allah have a beautiful pattern, a beautiful conduct for anyone whose hope is in Allah in the final day and who engages much in the praise of Allah. That Muhammad is the perfect example for every Muslim to follow. And so for you to be a Muslim, but to say that killing someone for believing in, for becoming an apostate or for blaspheming Muhammad is wrong, you can't do that. Muhammad is the perfect example. And so whatever Muhammad did, whatever Muhammad taught, you have to agree with that if you're a Muslim. And so that is very concerning for us who love our freedoms here in the West and in America, because you can't condemn anything that I just read about that Muhammad did or said as wrong. And also in the Quran, in chapter 5, verse 3, it says, this day I have perfected your religion for you, completed my favor upon you, and have chosen for you Islam as your religion. That Islam is the perfect and complete religion. And that includes all of Islam, not just the Quran, but all of Sharia, all of the Hadith, the Sunnah, these teachings from the Imams and the leaders of Islam. If you go against what they're saying, you're going against the perfect religion, divine revelation. You can't disagree with it. There's no arguing. There's no disputing. They have the authority from God. It's the perfect religion. You cannot arguing with it is arguing with God and blaspheming and argue and ultimately punishable. And so this is very concerning to me. You can see that Islam becomes violent. This stood out to me because, Jesus died for us, but in Islam, you don't have a leader who died for his people. You have a leader who says you can crucify people. And in the Quran, chapter 5, verse 33, it says, the punishment of those who wage war against Allah and his messenger and spread corruption in the land is to be killed or crucified, to have their hands and feet cut off on opposite sides, and to be exiled from the land. And so one of the things that someone who wages war against Allah or spreads corruption through the land. And so that's concerning to me, because the term corruption in the land, I feel like is very vague. And so what can a Muslim who's a leader, and when Sharia law is in place, when Muslims are in power, who can they say and what can they say is corruption in the land? Pretty much anything. Anything that goes against Islam at all is corruption in the land. And so you could be killed, crucified, have your hands and feet cut off. Like, this is a barbaric stuff going on, and exiled or even exiled from the land. And so all that's very concerning, that Jesus was crucified by the very people that rejected him, that waged war against him, that hated him. He died for them and said, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. But if anyone opposes Allah or his messenger, they will be the ones crucified. A very different religion here. And then you have these concerning videos of, this is not just what Muslims believed back in the day, but today, Muslims today, American Muslims, for example, you have Daniel Hakikachu in this video with his friend on this podcast, saying that they would kill this Christian who was a Muslim, became a Christian today if they were under a Muslim leader, if the Sharia law was in place.
I believe that the punishment for apostasy in a correct Islamic state is death. I believe that that's the correct. Let me finish. Let me just respond, sir. I believe that that is the correct punishment, which has been revealed by God, both in the Qur'an and the Bible.
Do you believe I should be killed today?
And I answered you, sir.
Yes or no?
I answered you.
Yes or no?
I answered you.
I think he said yes.
You want me to answer?
I said.
Yeah, you answered me.
In a proper Islamic jurisdiction, an Islamic nation, all of the laws of Islam and the Sharia as revealed by God should be applied.
So if we were in that kind of state, would you do it?
Including
I'm not the one that executes
with proper due process, with a proper court hearing, just like any nation of laws. The laws of the Sharia should be applied, including the death penalty for not only apostates, but also blasphemers.
You didn't answer me, yes or no?
We did answer.
Yeah. And then you have Ali Dawa, who has 1.3 million subscribers on YouTube, who lives in the UK, is saying that under Amir, it would be done, and we're proud of that.
This is a part of our religion. There's a reason to it. Yeah, there's a reason why there's a capital punishment, because people like you, little weaklings who leave their religion and cause corruption in the land by spreading it, the capital punishment in Islamic law would be applied to you. We have no doubt, and we're proud of that. Yeah, capital punishment will be applied in an Islamic state. Yeah, not individuals going and doing it themselves like idiots. Yeah, no, under an emir, it is done. Yes, and we, you know what, we'll be watching.
Man, that Muslims are proud to be killing apostates, be killing blasphemers. That is very scary for me. And so it shows that it makes me very hesitant. It makes me very hesitant to put a Muslim in charge. And just what's going on right now, and what's going on even with our brothers and sisters in Nigeria, the Christians in there, over 7,000 to maybe 8,000 Christians have been killed in Nigeria just this year in 2025 under radical Islamist extremists coming down and killing them and waging jihad, but more than that in a second. Even in America, when you look at the example of the Dearborn mayor and how he treated a Christian minister because he had concerns about a street sign being put up for a journalist who's sympathetic to and supportive of Hamas and terrorist organizations. And he just peacefully came and expressed his concerns at a meeting. And the mayor just like totally shamed him for what he believed and said, get out of the city. You're not welcome here. The minute you leave, the day you leave the city, I'll throw a parade.
Talks about how the blood of the martyrs, I'm quoting, irrigates the land of Palestine. And then further quotes, he talks about how the terrorists should strike them with knives and with their bare hands, and they're victorious. And he also encourages the use of rockets over there.
The best suggestion I have for you is to not drive on Warren Avenue, or to close your eyes while you're doing it. His name is up there, and I spoke at a ceremony celebrating it because he's done a lot for this community. And although you live here, I want you to know as mayor, you are not welcome here. And the day you move out of the city will be the day that I launch a parade celebrating the fact that you moved out of the city. Because you are not somebody who believes in coexistence. You're somebody who tries to preach it, but in fact you do everything but that.
He shamed him. And that's how Muslims work today once they're in power, or even just online on social media. If you say anything critical of Muhammad or the religion, you get shamed, you call it Islamophobe, and you can see that's how Muslim mayors will treat you in American cities, that if you say anything critical against Islam, you're shamed and you're celebrated when you leave this area. This is not freedom of religion. This is not freedom of speech. This is not coexistence. This is shaming and silencing those who think differently until Islam prevails. It's a political jihad taking place right in our own country, and it's just the start of it, I fear. But I hope that we would wake up as Americans and support something different. And come back to Christianity, where you have the principles that founded this nation that give us the true ability to have life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness in this country. Another thing of how Islam and Western values and Christianity is incompatible is in the Qur'an, chapter 4, verse 116. Verily, Allah forgives not the sin of setting up partners in worship with him, that he'll forgive every other sin, but if you associate anything and worship anything on the level of God with Allah, is the unforgivable sin. This is the sin of shirk, that you associate something with Allah. And Christians, we worship a human, someone who's 100% human, 100% man, Jesus Christ, truly human and truly man. And to worship Jesus is to commit shirk, and that is the unforgivable sin. And so Christianity and Islam are not the same religion. We don't worship the same God. They're polar opposites in a lot of what we believe. So the 4 doctrines that we should be aware about that are concerning is, number 1, Muslims have this doctrine called I'm going to try my best. I don't speak Arabic. Al-wala wa la abara, which is love and loyalty for fellow Muslims and hatred for non-Muslims. And so if you're a Muslim, you're in the in, you're loved, you're part of the community. If you're not a Muslim, you're in the out, and there actually should be hatred for you. And now some people, more moderate, more contemporary Muslims would say that we're not actually supposed to hate people who aren't Muslims. We're just supposed to hate disobedience against God. But people who are not Muslim are not being obedient to God. And so it would still be seen as people doing evil things, and there should be, I think, some level of hatred against that. But this is how the classical interpretation is for that doctrine, and it comes, you can see it in different ways in the Quran, like in chapter 98, verse 6 of the Quran. It says, those who reject truth among the people of the book, Jews, Christians, and among the polytheists, people who believe in many gods, will be in hellfire to dwell therein for they are the worst of creatures. So it's not just they're going to hell, but they're the worst of creatures, those who reject the truth of Islam, that they call them the worst of creatures. And so you can see this hatred for those who are not Muslim. But that's not the way we learn in the Bible. Even in the Old Testament, you hear in Leviticus chapter 19, verse 18, you shall not take vengeance or bear a grudge against the sons of your own people, but you shall love your neighbor as yourself. I am the Lord. And so you should love your fellow Jews in the Old Testament. But then in Leviticus 19, same chapter, go down to verse 33 and 34, it talks about foreigners. And so how should you treat foreigners? When a stranger sojourns with you in the land, you shall not do him wrong. You shall treat the stranger who sojourns with you as the native among you, and you shall love him as yourself. For we were strangers in the land of Egypt. That they're supposed to love the stranger, those who aren't Jews, as they love themselves. And so love for those who don't believe the same things that you believe. And then Jesus in the New Testament, what does he say? In Matthew chapter 5, verse 43, you have heard that it was said, you shall love your neighbor and hate your enemy. And so that's what we just read about the Muslims, that they do that. They love their fellow brother, they're Muslim, but they hate the unbeliever. Is this a Jewish teaching that Jesus is referring to? No, we just read Jesus is referring not to what the Old Testament says, but what the current Pharisees and teachers of the law, the Jewish traditions were at that time, not the divine word of God, that they were taught to love the fellow Jew but hate their enemies. But Jesus says in verse 44, but I say to you, love your enemies. Now Jesus takes it to the next level. In the Old Testament, they were supposed to love their neighbor, but they weren't called to love their enemies. But Jesus calls now us as Christians to not only to love fellow Christians, to not only love foreigners who may be nice to us, but to love your enemy. Wow, that is the total opposite of what we read in Islam. And that's why Christianity is the backbone. It's the principles that founded this great American nation, that we can love our enemies, even people who disagree with you. And so if as Muslim ideology and Sharia law becomes what's prevalent in America, you will not get this tolerance and this freedom of religion and freedom of speech and this freedom which comes from Christianity. You'll get oppression, you'll get animosity, you'll get throwing people in jail who disagree with you because you're supposed to hate your enemies, not love your enemies. Jesus goes on to say, love your enemies, pray for those who persecute you, so that you may be sons of your Father who's in heaven. For he makes the sun rise on the evil and the good, and sends rain on the just and on the unjust. That God is impartial. He shows goodness and common grace to all people, and that is a Western value that founds our nation. So the first doctrine was this tribalism or this racism based on not on race, but on belief in Muslim doctrine of love and loyalty to fellow Muslims and hatred for non-Muslims. The second doctrine is the doctrine of jihad, which has traditionally meant holy war. But what the word literally means is what Muslims will tell you. It doesn't mean war and fighting. It means to struggle, and that's what the word literally means. And so we look at what does this word mean in the Quran. So in the Quran, chapter 9, verse 73, O Prophet, strive, that word strive or jihad, against the unbelievers and the hypocrites, and be harsh with them, and their refuge is hell. What an evil destination. That they're supposed to strive and to be harsh against people who are disbelievers, and to know that their destination is hell. And so it's a warlike mentality, at least, of struggling, of being harsh with people who don't believe. And then we see not the word jihad, but we see what jihad has become. And Surah in chapter 9 of the Quran, verse 29, fight those who do not believe in Allah nor the last day, even if they are the people of the book, even if they're Jews, Christians, until they pay the jizya with willing submission and feel themselves subdued. So this is the sword, the verse of the sword here in the Quran, that this is some of Muhammad's last marching orders to his believers, that they are supposed to fight and kill those who do not believe in Allah, unless they're willing to become a Muslim or they're willing to pay jizya, which is a tax that makes them feel subdued, literally in their own words of their Quran, to show that they've been overcome, that Allah has conquered them. And now Muslims might say, well, this is a good thing to pay the jizya because you're getting protected. But it shows that there was no freedom here. There was no freedom. You were waged war on and you got attacked. And if you don't convert, you're going to die. And if you are not willing to convert, but you at least pay a tax, you will be protected. But that's one of the main reasons that Christians came to America and left, like England, is because the leader of the church was also the political leader, the king. And he was controlling them religiously, and he was also taxing them in America without representation. And this is literally tax without representation. You don't get a say in what this jizya is. You don't get to say what this tax money is used for. That's all decided by God, by what Muhammad and the Sharia says. You just have to pay the tax or you die, or you must convert. No freedom of religion, no freedom of speech. Don't blaspheme Muhammad. And we're going to tax you without representation as well. Anti-American values, anti-Christian values. Sahih Al-Bukhari, which Sahih means trustworthy. It's a trustworthy hadith. And 2787, you hear this on jihad. I heard Allah's messenger saying, the example of mujahid, which is someone who wages jihad in Allah's cause, and Allah knows better who really strives in his cause, is like a person who fasts and prays continuously. Allah guarantees that he will admit the mujahid in his cause into paradise if he is killed. Now this is crazy, because one of the ways you can be sure you'll go to heaven is if you die in waging jihad for Allah. And it says, otherwise he'll return him to his home safely with rewards and war booty. And so those who want to say jihad is not a violent thing, it's just, it's just a struggle, fighting for Allah just with your words, or, kindness or whatever it is. It's literally saying war booty. War booty. That this is a war act. It's war, it's fighting, and it's glorified that if you die in battle for Allah, you will go to heaven. And so no wonder there's so many radicals. No wonder there's so many Muslims going out there and killing Christians and Jews and non-believers, polytheists, because that guarantees that they go to heaven if they do this. And so this is a very dangerous teaching that we see in the Qur'an as well as the Hadith from Muhammad himself. And we see this not only in the Quran and the Hadith, but we see this historically. Islam is not historically a religion of peace. After Muhammad's death, from like 622 to 1000 AD, those like roughly 400 years after Muhammad dies. When Muhammad dies, Islam is just in the Arabian Peninsula, but then it spreads where basically 1/4 of the known world is conquered and becomes Muslim. And of that known world, a major part of it used to be Christian. But of the Christian known world at that time, during those 400 years, anywhere between 50 to 75% of the Christian world, of the Christian kingdom during that time of countries that believed and worshiped Jesus, were conquered by Muslims. That's how they spread through. They want to say jihad is a defensive war. If anything, is what the Muslims did historically, but it just using your brain. How is it going to spread out massively over 1/4 of the known world and all in defense? It had to be an offensive war to conquer and to make all these nations Muslim in those 400 years. And then the Christians get disparaged for the Crusades, but the Crusades were in response to those 400 years of war and conquering done by the Muslims, the Christian countries at the time. Like, we got to fight back. We're not going to get conquered and become Muslim. And the cross and the scimitar. I watched this whole talk with Ali Beth Stuckey talking to a Muslim historian. He has a book called The Cross and the Scimitar. Really interesting, all on the history there of the spreading of Islam and the battles that took place. Definitely worth watching the podcast as worth of checking out the book. And then, did you know, I was shocked by this, that once America is established as a country, we defeat the British, the Revolutionary War happens, and now we're America. We've declared our independence, we won the war. The first war America has as an established nation is against Muslims. I never remember learning that. If I did, I obviously didn't care at that time in my youth, but this was very interesting and concerning to me as American. In the 1780s, before the U.S. had a strong navy, American merchant ships were being attacked in the Mediterranean Bay by Barbary pirates. Now, I didn't even know Barbary pirates were Muslims, but they're state-sponsored pirates from North Africa's Barbary states, Tripoli, Tunis, Algiers, and Morocco. These are semi-independent Muslim states under the nominal rule of the Ottoman Empire. The pirate ships captured enslaved crews and demanded tribute, protection money from nations who wished to trade safely in the region. And so, why this is crazy, because in 1786, you have Thomas Jefferson, who was the U.S. minister to France, and John Adams, the minister ambassador to Britain, two of their second and third president of the United States, go and meet in London with Sadi Haji Abdul Rahman Aja, the ambassador of Tripoli, to discuss why the Barbary states were attacking American ships and taking sailors hostages. Two American founders, heroes, go to London to meet with a Muslim ambassador of the Barbary pirates to try to create peace. And why are you attacking our ships? And they were very disturbed by the explanation of why the Muslims were attacking them. To quote what they said to the American Congress on March 28th, 1786, they said, he said that it was written in the Quran that all nations which had not acknowledged the authority of Islam were sinners, that it was their right and duty to make war upon them whenever they could be found, and to make slaves of all they could to take as prisoners, and that every Muslim who was slain in battle was sure to go to paradise. Wow. That is Americans' first encounter with Muslims. And what do the Barbary pirates say? Yeah, we're just evil pirates. We just want your money. No, they say we're doing a holy thing. We're doing a right thing. And this is what the Qur'an commands us. And we just read about it in the Qur'an, and we just read about it in Hadith, that they believe they'll go to heaven for this war. This is a holy thing they're doing. And so it deeply disturbed Thomas Jefferson and John Adams, and should disturb us. And I was never taught this. This is American history. I never heard that quote before. Man, I feel like Americans were taught this in school. There would be a lot less sympathy for Islam in our country, and Mandani would not be the mayor of New York City. This is crazy. This is our American heritage and our first interaction with Islam. Other things that are concerning of proof of jihad in our day is there's this thing that I'm just newly learning about called the Muslim Brotherhood. And there's like history with America. There's the whole Holy Land Foundation case. So there's this crazy document. I saw a video that really, I never heard about the Muslim Brotherhood. And this video brought some things to light.
I am holding in my hand the Muslim Brotherhood plan for the destruction of the United States. The title of the plan is مذكرة تفسيرية للهدف الاستراتيجي العام للجماعة في أمريكا الشمالية. You all got that? An explanatory memorandum for the general strategic goal for the group, the Muslim Brotherhood in North America, written 5/22/1991. Understanding the role of the Muslim Brother in North America. The process of settlement is a civilization jihadist process with all the word means. The Ikhwan, which is the Arabic word for brothers, must understand that their work in America is a kind of grand jihad in eliminating and destroying the Western civilization from within and sabotaging its miserable house by their hands and the hands of the believers, so that it is eliminated and Allah's religion is made victorious over all other religions. They don't mince words, do they? But the most important page of this document is the last page. They list 29 front Islamic organizations set up in the United States with the specific goal of sabotaging America from within and destroying America by our own hands. Number 1 on the list is ISNA, Islamic Society of North America. They are now advisors to President Obama about Middle East policy. So we not only have the fox watching the hen house, we have the fox inside the White House dictating policy in the ear of the president. As a matter of fact, we in the United States have 150 terrorist organizations right now operating in America, and these are the ones we know about.
And that was concerning because there's not just fighting jihad, but there's jihad of the tongue, there's jihad of the pen, there's money jihad, and there's baby jihad of women having babies to spread jihad in North America. And they wanted to use like Western principles in our democratic, our republic voting system to invade America and use our democracy against us. So they have all those different organizations set up in America to promote Islam. And this is not just like a one-time crazy thing. In July 11th, 2018, the U.S. congressional hearing to the 115th Congress had a oversight subcommittee meeting on the national security hearing that was titled The Muslim Brotherhood's Global Threat. And its purpose was to examine whether the Muslim Brotherhood really possessed a global threat or not. And some key findings were the Muslim Brotherhood is a transnational ideological movement. The Muslim Brotherhood is an ideological root of many extremist groups. The Brotherhood uses gradualism and long-term influences and strategics of dawah, which is like Islam apologetics, institutional buildings, political engagement, community organization, and civilizational jihad to overcome countries with Islam. And you can just see the evidence of that. Like in the UK, I believe that London has a mayor that's been the leader of the city of London for like 12 years now. There's videos, maybe I can show you one right here, of like all these different Muslim leaders taking over Europe and the UK and different things like that. And man, very disturbing was the treatment of women in the UK in this article I read about.
I have the anti-terrorism police coming to investigate me for what they call Islamophobia. It's very logical for an ancient Coptic Christian who their people were genocided by Islam to be fearful of Islam. Muslims killed 8,000 people in Nigeria this year. You look at Sudan, Christianity is being genocided. You looked at the Armenian genocide, at least 1 million Catholics were killed. Islam is using democracy to destroy democracy. You can literally see what's happening in London. Sadiq Khan has been in control of London for the last 12 years. He's an Afghani Muslim. In the last 20 years, 100,000 white girls were and 80% of the were by Muslim Afghani men. 30% of the happened by people called Muhammad. At the moment, Sadiq Khan is arresting people who dare to criticize Islam.
The father, I think, of one of these girls is so distraught at the lack of justice for his daughter that he ended up going to prison. They called it racism.
That's exactly what happens in Egypt. We already have Sharia law in the West.
Crazy. And that this the Muslim Brotherhood is state-sponsored from nations like Qatar and Turkey, enemies of America. They're ideological incubators for modern jihadism, and they oversee many of the mosques here in America, and it directly oversees Hamas. We see the terrible attacks going on there. And so Senator Tommy Tuberville of Alabama outlaws is passed trying to promote bills that outlaw Sharia in America, and I'm for it. It makes sense from all that I'm reading that Senator Tommy Tuberville is not just an Islamophobe. He has some real concerns that need to be looked into, and I think agreed with. You have examples like Sheikh Zakaullah Salim from 2 years ago, preaching in the UK. He was the head imam of the Greenland Masjid in Birmingham, United Kingdom. And he was really blown up on the media because he was teaching in a Western mosque that the people who commit zina, which is adultery, according to the Islamic or Sharia, whenever the Sharia is established, the punishment for the adulterer, man or woman, the punishment for them is if they are married, they will be stoned to death. And if they're unmarried, they will be beaten with 100 lashes in front of a big Muslim gathering. And he's teaching about Sharia law and how they should beat people with 100 lashes and stone people to death for adultery. And we can see this in the Hadith, Sahih Muslim 1690. Allah's messenger as saying, receiving from me, Allah has adorned a way for those women. When an unmarried male commits adultery with an unmarried female, they should receive 100 lashes and banishment for 1 year. In the case of a married male committing adultery with a female male, they should receive 100 lashes and be stoned to death. And then in Sahih Muslim 1695, he says, he, the Holy Prophet, entrusted the child to one of the Muslims and then pronounced punishment of this woman who got pregnant from adultery. And she was put in a ditch up to her chest and commanded people to be stoned her. That for women especially, they're supposed to be buried up to their chest and then stoned.
Punished and she's stoned to death. And according to the Sharia again, when it comes to women, there must be a hole dug in the earth, in the ground, and she must be covered up to the half of the body.
This seems wrong. It seems barbaric, and this is what they're trying to establish with Sharia law. This is what Sharia teaches, and this is total opposite of where Lord Jesus showed in John 8 that when the Jewish leaders brought the woman caught in adultery before him and tried to trap him with what the Old Testament said. He said, who's ever without the first sin, cast the first stone. And he says, women, where are your accusers? And she says, none, Lord. And he says, neither do I condemn you. Go and sin no more. That Jesus does not teach us to kill with stoning for adultery anymore. None of us are perfect. And he, as the perfect man, did not condemn her, but did command her to go and sin no more. We're no longer supposed to stone people to death. And for adultery, that Jesus abolishes that. We're not under the law anymore, we're under grace, and we can see that in Christian values and teaching. So we had the first one, love and loyalty for fellow Muslims, hatred of non-Muslims. Doctrine number 2, doctrine of jihad that we're seeing today, presently. And then the doctrine of abrogation. And so why in the Quran do you see these nice, kind verses of how Muslims should treat Christians, but also these other verses of Muslims attacking Christians. It is because that the Quran was revealed to Muhammad gradually over 23 years. Piecemeal, wasn't all at one time. And so his first 12 years of his prophethood were in Mecca. And these were mostly short poetic surahs, chapters, and it's usually teaching very nicely, because while he was in Mecca for those first 12 years, he didn't have an army. He wasn't powerful and influential like he's in his next years. So the next, after he travels from Mecca to Medina, Medina is where he spends his last 10 years as a prophet, and where he gains power, where he gains army, where they set up an Islamic state in Arabia. And you hear longer legal warfare and community chapters in the Quran. And so how do Muslims deal with this tension? They have this doctrine of abrogation, that the later chapters and in Revelation replace and override the earlier ones. And so that means that for the most part, the later, more intense, scary chapters and verses in the Quran override the nice and kind ones earlier said in Mecca. And so we can see this, some examples. So these are the earlier Mecca surahs, chapters, and chapter 29 of the Quran, verse 46, and while Muhammad was in Mecca, he says, "Do not argue with the people of the book, except in the most kind and gracious way. We believe in what has been sent down to you and what has been sent down to us. Our God and your God is one." That the Jewish and the Christian and Muslim God, they're all the same God, and we can get along with kind and graciousness with each other. Another one while I was in Mecca is chapter 16, verse 125. "Invite the way of the Lord with wisdom and gentle preaching, and argue with them in the best way." It's just, hey, we're going to disagree, but we're going to argue, but we're going to be kind and nice to each other. But then we see later, some later chapters in the Quran, or like chapter 5, and one of the latest, if not the latest, in the Quran is chapter 9, and that is the most intense and violent chapter in the Quran. So chapter 5, verses 72 and 73, "They have certainly disbelieved who said God is the Messiah. They have certainly disbelieved who say God is the third of three," targeting Christians and calling us disbelievers now, not that we believe in the same God. And then in the Quran, in chapter 9, verse 29, which we already read, the jihad related verse, "Fight those who disbelieve among the people of the book until they pay the jizya and then feel themselves subdued." And so abrogation is this important thing for Christians and Americans to realize, that not all verses in the Quran hold the same weight. The later ones hold more authority, which is very concerning, because those are the ones that are more intense and violent. The fourth doctrine is the doctrine of taqiyya. And I believe this gives Muslims license to lie. And now let me explain about that. So in the Quran, in chapter 16, verse 106, you hear, "Anyone who, after accepting faith in Allah, utters unbelief, except under compulsion, is going to face the wrath of Allah," basically. So once you become a Muslim, you have to stay a Muslim, and you will face the wrath of God if you apostatize, unless you're under compulsion, unless someone's like, "Hey, are you a Muslim? You're going to die." You can say, "No, I'm not a Muslim," in that situation to protect your life under compulsion, and you won't be under the wrath of God anymore. So you can lie in situations like that. And that's what most people believe is taqiyya. But then you also have this other example in chapter 3, verse 28. "Let not the believers take for friends or helpers unbelievers rather than believers." The Muslims are supposed to have friends that are Muslims, not unbelievers. "If any do that, in nothing will there be their help from Allah, except by way of precaution, that ye may guard yourselves from them." So Muslims are supposed to have that doctrine of love and friendship with their fellow Muslims, and not have friends with unbelievers, unless they're in a place where they need to make friends with non-believers as a way of protecting themselves. And so you're allowed to treat people differently depending on the situation you're in. And Ibn Kathir, which is a 14th century Arab Islamic scholar, and he's the most respected and widely used, has the most respected and widely used Quranic commentary in the world. says this on this verse on chapter 3, verse 28. He says, unless you indeed fear danger for them, meaning except those believers who in some areas or times fear for their safety from the disbelievers. In this case, such believers are allowed to show friendship to disbelievers outwardly, but never inwardly. For instance, al-Bukhari recorded that Abu Darda said, we smile in the face of some people, although our hearts curse them. That's scary, guys. That is scary. That it's literally a teaching in the Quran, and then their most respected commentary on this says that, yeah, you can lie. If you live in America and it's mostly people that don't agree with Islam and the more extreme teachings of Islam and Sharia law that we've seen like Surah 9 and Surah 5, those chapters of the Quran, then yeah, you can lie and you can say, no, we just all want for coexistence. We're not pushing Sharia law here. We love Western values to protect yourself and to make Islam look good. But you're never supposed to actually feel that in your heart. It's just supposed to be an outward front, a hypocritical front that they put on. And so the question on should Christians vote for Muslims in politics, man, this one makes it really hard because that's not it. That's not all there is here in Taqiyya. Because in the Quran, chapter 3, verse 54, it says, and the unbelievers, the Christians, the Jews, the polytheists, whoever it was here, plotted and planned. And Allah too planned, and the best of planners is Allah. Now this is concerning because in the more modern contemporary versions of the Bible, it says Allah is the best of planners. But when you look at the Arabic word for a planner here, it's makr. And when you look up on the literal Arabic lexicon definition of makr or makra, here's what the Lane's Arabic lexicon says, that makra is to practice deceit, guile, circumvention, to plot, to contrive, to exercise a craft. And so it's like to outwit, to deceive, to do something secretly. And so it's saying these unbelievers were trying to trick and deceive the Muslims, but Allah was a planner and deceiver and a tricker too, and he outwitted and outplanned and tricked. That Allah is the best of tricksters, is what it's saying, that he's the best of deceivers. And so their God is willing to be deceiving and tricking and planning. And that's different from the Christian God. Jesus set up the example that he is the truth, that he has nothing to do with deceivers, that Satan is the father of lies, of deceivers. And so that's concerning. And then you see that not only is in the Quran, Allah is called the greatest of planners or deceivers, but then for the most important part of Christianity, God tricked them. In the Quran, chapter 4, verse 157, it reads that they said in boast, we killed Christ Jesus, the son of Mary, the messenger of Allah, but they killed him not. Now they, in Muslim teaching, Jesus is a Muslim and he is a faithful prophet. He didn't call himself the Son of God. And so they want to protect Jesus. That Jesus dying on the cross is a bad look for Muslims. They don't understand the power of the cross and why Jesus did what he did. And so they want to say, like, no, Jesus wasn't killed on the cross. They boast about how they killed Jesus. No, a messenger of Allah would never be killed like that in crucifixion. And so God protected them. He wasn't actually killed, but it was made to appear to them. And those who differ then are full of doubts with no certain knowledge, but only conjecture to follow. And of surety they killed him not. And so Jesus was not actually crucified in Muslim teaching, according to this verse, but Allah made it look like Jesus was crucified. Like he put someone's face on Jesus, or maybe even a whole different person on Jesus on the cross. So it wasn't actually Jesus that died on the cross, but Allah tricked them. He made it look like Jesus, but it wasn't really Jesus. But Allah is the best of planners. And that's just crazy because, that's so foundational for the Christian teaching, for what the Bible says. And then also it's so historically reliable and credible and established that Jesus truly did die on the cross. You have all these statements from people who are not Christians, scholars who are New Testament historical scholars that are not Christians say this about the cross. Gerd Ludemann, the fact of the death of Jesus as a consequence of crucifixion is indisputable. Despite hypotheses of pseudo-death or deception, which are sometimes put forward, it need not to be discussed here further. Paul Fredrickson, the single most solid fact about Jesus' life is his death. He was executed by the Roman prefect Pilate or around Passover in the manner of Rome, reserved in particularly for political insurrectionists, namely crucifixion. John Dominic Carson, there is not the slightest doubt about the fact of Jesus' crucifixion under Pontius Pilate. That he was crucified as sure as anything historical will ever be. And so you have all this stuff, unanimous, indisputable, the most solid fact in Jesus' life, as sure as anything historical will ever be, said about these historical New Testament scholars that aren't even Christians, saying this about Jesus' death and the crucifixion. But then you have this problem with the Qur'an saying, for surety, Jesus was not killed on the cross. It was only made to appear to them that that's actually happened. And so either Allah's the greatest of deceivers and tricksters, or the book is just wrong and unhistorical and unreliable. And so that's one problem for Muslims to deal with. Another, and so moving into why Christians shouldn't believe in Islam and why Islam's not credible, is another big problem, is the Muslim dilemma. In the Quran, chapter 5, verse 46, you have this problem. I learned this from Wes Huff and some other Christian leaders. Wes Huff has a video called The Quran Has a Problem. Great video, a short 3 minutes on this. But the Quran says, we sent, following in their footsteps, Jesus, the son of Mary, confirming the Torah that had come down before him. And we gave him the gospel, in which was guidance and light, confirming the Torah as guidance and instruction for the righteous. Let all the people of the gospel judge by what Allah has revealed therein. And whoever does not judge by what Allah has revealed, then it is those who are defiantly disobedient. So the problem here is that it says that God sent Jesus, and he gave Jesus the gospel, and the gospel is a guidance and a light, and the gospel confirms what the Torah said, and that the people of the gospel, which are Christians, me and you, are supposed to judge what Allah has revealed. We're supposed to judge the Quran and Muhammad by the gospel. That's what the Quran tells Christians to do, or we're defiantly disobedient, that we are disobeying God if we do not judge the Quran by what the gospel says. And the Quran even says, as well as the Bible, that the words of God do not change. In chapter 6, verse 34, it says, certainly were messengers denied before you, they were patient. None can alter the words of Allah. That the words of Allah cannot be altered. That Muslims on this problem, because the problem is the Bible and the gospel specifically does not line up with the teachings of the Quran, but they show the Quran to be false. Now Muslims will say, well, the Bible's been corrupted. Well, the Quran and the Bible say that the Bible cannot be corrupted. The Quran cannot be corrupted. It cannot be altered. Chapter 6 of the Quran, verse 115. None can change his words. None can change the words of Allah. So right there, that's a problem. But not only that, but Muhammad taught in the 7th century. But we have whole Bibles, full Bibles, the Codex Sinaiticus and Codex Vaticanus from the 4th century. So 300 years before Muhammad is coming and preaching, we have what the Bible actually said. And guess what? Those copies line up with what our Bible says today. And so it has not been corrupted. And even we have scraps from Codex Ambrosianus from the 6th and 7th century right in the Middle East that line up with what said in the Quran and the Bible, what the Gospels say today. And so the Gospel has not been corrupted. And when we weigh the Quran with what the Bible says, we show that the Quran does not line up. We should not accept the message of the Quran by the Quran's own standard. And not only that, but Jesus tells us in Matthew chapter 7, as we test Muhammad by what the people of the book, people of the gospel should test Muhammad by the gospel. Jesus says in Matthew 7:15, beware of false prophets who come to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly are ravenous wolves. You shall recognize them by their fruits. And so the reason that Christians should reject a false prophet, Jesus tells us, is by their fruits. And so when we look just at the moral fruits of Muhammad, Jesus taught us that the fruit of the gospel should bring loving your enemies. Do not take revenge. One marriage, Matthew 19, 4-6. Purity in heart, non-violence in spreading the faith. But Muhammad's life participated in warfare. He had multiple wives, up to 11 wives. He permitted his followers to fight their enemies, carried out punishments as a political leader, ordered and approved executions of his enemies, took women captive in warfare, saying that you can take whatever your right hand possesses. And Muslims are said they can have up to 4 wives, but then you have this exception for Muhammad that he could have as many wives as he wanted. And we see that Muslims are allowed to have multiple wives in the Quran, chapter 4, verse 3. Many women of your choice, 2 or 3 or 4. But then in Surah chapter 33, verse 50 of the Quran, it says, the prophet, if the prophet wished to wed her, this only for 3 and thee, and not for the believers at large. That Muhammad can have whoever he want, but not for the believers as large. And not only that, but the Quran says that Muslims can beat their wives. In the Quran, chapter 4, verse 34, it says, as the woman whose part ye fear disloyalty in conduct, admonish them, refuse them in their beds, and then beat them. And then you have the word lightly there in parentheses saying that that's what's really meaning lightly, but you still have the word beat them there. And not only that, but Muhammad, killed people for mocking him, and he had a child bride, Aisha, and that is definitely concerning because this is attested by the Quran. The Hadith is most trusted source, Sahih al-Bukhari 51:33. The Prophet married his child bride when she was 6 years old, and he consummated his marriage when she was 9 years old. That's not the fruits of a righteous leader, a leader of God. That's the leader of someone who's led by sin, by lust, by power, and not someone that we should accept the fruits of. And that's the test that Jesus gives us, to test them by the fruits. But then Paul says in Galatians chapter 1, verse 6, I am astonished by the way you so quickly are turning to a different gospel. Not that there is another one, but there are some who trouble you, want to distort the gospel of Christ. But even if we or an angel from heaven should preach to you a gospel contrary to the one we preach to you, let him be accursed. As we have said before, so now we say again, if anyone is preaching to you a gospel contrary to the one received, let him be accursed. That Paul gives us this clear teaching that there is one gospel. And if someone gives you a different gospel, even an angel from heaven, you should reject him and consider him accursed by God. And this is very interesting because Muhammad attested in some of the Hadith and Sunnah here is he was given his revelation by angels and maybe even by a demon. And Sahih al-Bukhari 3:1, you have this narration, then the revelation paused and the prophet became so sad that he intended several times to throw himself off the tops of a mountain cliff. He tried to kill himself because of the revelation he was getting, I would say, from a demon. And we see that in Ibn Ishaq, Surat Razul Allah, in this translation here. This is the earliest surviving biography of Muhammad from the 8th century. It says, the prophet said, I feared that something had happened to me. He feared he was either possessed or a poet or a man possessed. I would go to the top of the mountain, throw myself down so I may kill myself and be at rest. That he feared being possessed by a jinn, by an evil spirit here when he was first receiving his revelation. And I would say because he was being deceived by a demon. And these revelations are demonic and they teach a different gospel. And he was a messenger that was a false prophet and is accursed by God. And Christians should not follow this or promote this religion. And ultimately, that every knee will bow and every tongue will confess, as we read in Philippians 2, that Jesus is Lord. And so even though Muhammad spread all these false religion beliefs, and even though there's billions, I think maybe of Muslims now, millions, lots of Muslims today, that every Muslim, every radical jihadist, even Muhammad himself, will bend his knee before the Lord Jesus Christ and confess him as Lord.
When Christians have historically, quote unquote, taken up the sword, they're doing it in rebellion against the words of Jesus. When Muslims historically have taken up the sword, they're doing it in obedience to the words of Allah in the Quran. Just erratically, there's not a moral equivalence. How long have you been in New York City chart? So this is what a lot of people are like, dude, I don't know what to do with this. So this is who voted for Mamdani. And somebody tweeted, man, the people of New York City, this is how he tweeted, the people of New York City just elected a Muslim communist. And then the response was, well, actually, the people of New York City didn't. And they pointed to this data because people who have been in New York City less than 5 years voted for Mamdani at an 83% clip. People who were born in New York City voted for him at a 34% clip, because I referenced it. So this was like shortly before the election. So you've got it right there. Among American-born New Yorkers, it was Mamdani only had support at 31%. Among foreign-born New Yorkers, it was 62%. Essentially, the immigration principles of the Old Testament. This is what you're referring to. Yeah, keep going. I just wanted listeners to know what you were talking about. Keep going.
Yeah, sorry if I wasn't clear on that, because that's what especially from Christians right now, that's one of the debates. There's churches in Nashville right now that would, they're just really angry at all the immigration policies happening right now, because they read the welcome the immigrant and love the immigrant.
That's right.
And then they skip over they have to obey the laws, just Deuteronomy 23, right, moral alignment. You have to leave your foreign gods behind. That's 100% what God was saying. That's Deuteronomy 7, 3, and 4. Live under Israel's law, Numbers 15 and 16. Their borders were not open. Their borders were protected, and they were closed for purity. And they had to decide who went in and who got to stay in and who had to leave based on whether or not they would adapt to to Jewish customs, laws, and religion, as opposed to coming in and saying we could have a false god here and a false god there. And in America, we've said over the years that pluralism is our strength, and I guess the more I think, it's just nonsense. Like, we need to be unified around something.
This out. This is to Darren's point. So you run down the list. Obviously, in Warsaw, you got John. So, okay, there you go. London, Muhammad. Manchester, Muhammad. Berlin, Muhammad. Brussels, Muhammad. Amsterdam, Muhammad. The Hague, Muhammad. Oslo, Muhammad. The most common baby names in the cities. And people are just pointing out, like, hey, man, essentially Europe has fallen is kind of the vibe.
The one thing that they're doing right now, long game strategy, is not out immigrating us and out breeding us.
Yeah, yep.
They're going to outvote us.
And so how do Christians supposed to respond to all this? I think, one, you should be aware. You should look into some of this stuff yourself. Make sure I'm telling you the truth. And then you should stand up and speak. Speak out and oppose the teachings of Islam. But ultimately, of course, Christians are supposed to love Muslims. So we should love the Muslims that are here. We should share Jesus with them. We should love them, care for them, be friends with them, show them what true religion and true Christianity looks like, to be able to defend our faith, to show hospitality to them. But should Christians vote for Muslims in politics? No. Now, is there ever a case where I would vote for a Muslim and this Muslim was shown that he actually loves Western values, and he loves freedom of speech, and he loves freedom of religion, and he holds on to that, and he condemns that these things that Muhammad did, things in the Hadith and stuff like that, and he condemns jihad, then yeah, I think I would vote for that. But with the doctrine of taqiyya and the way that Muhammad is the best of deceivers, and what Ibn Kathir said about how Muslims can, portray something outwardly, but never in the heart, it would make me very worried to vote for a Muslim, pretty much ever to be a political leader, because in Muhammad, they have the uswa wasana, the perfect example. And so to disagree with Muhammad is to disagree with Islam. And it's really, if you start disagreeing with Muhammad, are you really a Muslim anymore? And Muhammad did not have a good example to follow. And the law he set up, the Sharia he set up, is dangerous and deadly and steals the freedoms that we love so much in our country. And so that's why I will think it's wrong to vote for a Muslim in politics. And that another big thing that I think we should do as Christians is we should close, as Americans, that we should close our borders to Muslims. That I believe in immigration, but immigration needs to come with assimilation. And you cannot be a Muslim in the fullest sense and have Western values. That you're going to secretly be wanting Sharia law, which is against Western values this whole time, because you think Muhammad and the Quran are the perfect religion and the perfect example. And so for a Muslim to immigrate here, they have to no longer become a Muslim. No longer be a Muslim, because they have to embrace Western values of freedom of speech, freedom of religion. And I just think those two are incompatible. They can't go together. That's my 2 cents. I hope this is helpful. I hope this makes you think deeper about Islam. And I'm not promoting violence here. I'm not promoting hatred. I'm just having some critical thoughts about the actual sources here. And I'll, of course, want everyone to believe in the Lord Jesus, because only in his name alone is there salvation, and only him alone is there true freedom. God bless.